My own son pushed my husband and me off a 150-foot cliff. As I lay there, broken and bleeding, every breath felt like my last. Then, through the agony, I heard my husband's desperate whisper, "Florence, don't move. Play dead. Now." My name is Florence, and I'm 65 years old. The story I'm about to share is one I never thought I'd live to tell, and I'm telling it now because I need you to know that monsters are real. They don't always hide under the bed or lurk in the shadows. Sometimes, they sit at your dinner table, they call you Mom, and they lull you into a false sense of security for decades before they decide your life is no longer convenient for them. What I'm going to tell you will challenge everything you think you know about the sanctity of family. It's a story of the deepest love, the most profound betrayal, and the desperate will to survive. Just last week, my only living son, Adrian, and his wife, Nicole, took my husband Lawrence and me on a trip to the Eagles Point overlook, right here in our corner of Oregon. The autumn air was crisp, filled with the scent of pine and damp earth, and the view was breathtaking, a panoramic masterpiece of the Cascade Mountains painted in hues of gold and amber. I remember holding my husband's hand, his familiar calloused palm in mine, and feeling a deep sense of peace. After 42 years of marriage, these quiet moments were everything. And then, in an instant, that peace was shattered. As we stood near the edge, posing for a family photo, I felt two pairs of hands firmly on my back and Lawrence's. It was my son, and he was pushing. The fall felt like an eternity, and a single heartbeat all at once. The world became a blur of blue sky and green trees, the wind roaring in my ears like a freight train. I didn't even have time to scream. My last coherent thought was of Adrian's face, not twisted in anger, but blank, calm, and calculating. It was the face of a stranger. Then came the impact, a brutal, shattering explosion of pain that ripped through every inch of my body. It wasn't a clean, merciful darkness. It was a blinding, agonizing white light. I was sure I was dead. But then, through the fog of shock and the metallic taste of blood in my mouth, I heard my husband's voice. It wasn't a shout, but a ragged, desperate hiss of air, spoken right beside my ear. "Florence, don't move. For God's sake, play dead. Play dead." The words barely registered, but some primal instinct deep within me understood. My body, though broken and screaming in agony, went limp. My breathing became shallow, almost imperceptible. But you see, lying there on the cold, hard ground, listening for the sound of our son's footsteps coming to finish the job, I realized something with horrifying clarity. This act, this monstrous attempt to murder his own parents for an inheritance, wasn't the worst thing our son had ever done. It wasn't even the first time he had stood by while a family member's life was extinguished. No. The real horror, the one that allowed this moment to happen, was a secret that had been festering in our perfect little home in Cedar Creek for 20 long years. A secret born from another tragedy, on another body of water, that we all tragically agreed to call an accident. It's a strange thing, the trust we place in family. It's supposed to be the one unbreakable bond in this world. And maybe that's a good place to start this conversation. Let me know in the comments if you believe family bonds are truly unconditional, or if everything has a breaking point. I used to know the answer to that. Or at least, I thought I did, right up until the moment I felt the solid ground disappear from beneath my feet. To understand how we ended up broken and bleeding at the bottom of that ravine, you have to understand the life we built, the life we thought was perfect. Our story doesn't begin with a fall. It begins in a small town called Cedar Creek, nestled in the green heart of Oregon. It's the kind of place where you know your mailman by his first name, where the air always carries the faint, clean scent of pine, and where the high school football games on Friday nights are the biggest event of the week. For 42 years, this town wasn't just where we lived, it was our entire world. It was a world of safety, of community, of deeply planted roots. Lawrence built our home with his own two hands on a quiet, tree-lined street a few blocks from the town square. It was a sturdy craftsman bungalow with a wide front porch and a swing he made from a single piece of oak. We spent countless summer evenings on that swing, watching the fireflies flicker to life as the sun dipped below the mountains, listening to the distant laughter of neighborhood kids. The house itself was his masterpiece. Every piece of furniture, from the heavy dining table where we shared thousands of meals to the delicate rocking chair where I nursed my babies, was a testament to his love. His hands, though rough and calloused from a lifetime of work, could coax poetry from wood. My life was filled with the crayon-scented chaos of being an elementary school teacher for 30 years, and after retiring, the peaceful satisfaction of tending to the town's community garden. Lawrence's was filled with the scent of cedar and sawdust that clung to his clothes like a second skin. He wasn't just a carpenter, he was an artist. We were a team, a partnership built on shared dreams and quiet understanding. Our life wasn't grand or luxurious, but it was rich in ways that money could never buy. It was real. It was ours. And we believed with every fiber of our beings that it was unbreakable. We were blessed with 2 sons, Stephen and Adrian. They were our pride, the center of our universe. Stephen, our firstborn, was sunshine in human form. He inherited Lawrence's talent for building and my love for people. He was the kind of boy who was a friend to everyone, the star quarterback who also took the time to help a classmate struggling with their homework. He was the one who'd organize neighborhood baseball games in the summer, the one who'd stay late to help his father in the shop without ever being asked. He had a laugh that could fill the entire house and a heart that seemed to have no limits. His dreams were as solid and well-constructed as the furniture he helped his father build. He wanted to become an architect, to build homes for other families right here in Cedar Creek. Adrian, 5 years younger, was different. He was more introspective, a quieter soul who lived more in his head than out in the world. Where Stephen was an open book, Adrian had chapters he kept entirely to himself. I loved him just as fiercely, of course. A mother's love isn't measured or divided, it simply expands. But he was always a little harder to reach, often lost in his own world of thoughts and plans that he rarely shared with us. He was brilliant with numbers and computers, things that Lawrence and I barely understood. We were just proud that he had found his own path. We thought his reserve was just a sign of a deep thinker, a boy who saw the world in a more complex way. We never once imagined that behind those quiet, watchful eyes, a different kind of calculation was taking place, a different kind of blueprint being drawn, one that didn't involve building things up, but tearing them down. For years, that was our family. Stephen, our bright, shining star, and Adrian, our quiet, steady moon. They were different, but they were brothers, and we believed their love for each other was a given, an unspoken law of nature. That belief, like so many others I once held sacred, was shattered the summer Stephen turned 20. It was 20 years ago, but the memory is seared into my mind with such brutal clarity that it feels like last week. It was a perfect Oregon August, hot and lazy, the kind of summer that feels like it will last forever. Stephen was home from his first year of college, studying architecture, and he was full of life, his mind brimming with plans and designs. He and Adrian had planned a final fishing trip on the Columbia River before Stephen had to head back to school. It was supposed to be a simple day, a rite of passage for 2 brothers, a last chance to connect before the season changed. I remember packing them a lunch that morning, the same way I had since they were little boys, sandwiches, chips, and a couple of cold sodas in a small cooler. Stephen gave me a hug at the door, his tall frame easily enveloping mine. He smelled of soap and sunshine. "Don't worry, Mom," he'd said with that easy grin of his. "I'll make sure Adrian doesn't get sunburned." Those were the last words my firstborn son ever spoke to me. The call came late that afternoon. It wasn't from the boys. It was from the county sheriff. The words he used were cautious, clinical. "Ma'am, there's been an accident on the river. A small boat capsized near Rooster Rock. One young man was found on the shore. We're still searching for the other." The world tilted on its axis. The drive to the marina was a blur of terror and frantic prayer. When we arrived, we found Adrian wrapped in a thick wool blanket, sitting in the back of an ambulance. He was shivering, his lips blue, but he was alive. Stephen was not. They searched for his body for 3 days. 3 days of an agonizing, sleepless vigil, watching boats crisscross the vast, indifferent expanse of the river. The whole town came out to help. Neighbors brought us food we couldn't eat, and offered words of comfort we couldn't hear. On the 3rd day, they found him. Adrian told us his story through chattering teeth, his voice a monotone whisper. He said a sudden squall had rolled in from the west, the way they sometimes do, whipping the calm water into a treacherous frenzy. A huge wave, he said, had swamped their small aluminum boat, and it went under in seconds. He told us they were both thrown into the icy water. He said he tried to reach Stephen, that he even held onto his hand for a moment, but the current was a monster, too powerful, and it ripped his brother from his grasp. He said he watched Stephen go under and never come back up. We clung to his every word because the alternative was unthinkable. We were drowning in grief, and our surviving son had just handed us a life raft, a tragic but logical explanation. But even then, in the deepest fog of my sorrow, I remember things that felt wrong, little details that pricked at the edges of my consciousness. I remember the almost complete lack of scratches or bruises on Adrian, despite his story of being tossed in the violent current. I remember the strange calmness in his voice as he recited the events for the third, fourth, fifth time to the police and to us, as if he were reading from a well-rehearsed script. He cried, but his eyes seemed dry. His anguish felt performed. At the time, I pushed those thoughts away, ashamed of myself. I told myself it was shock. Grief manifests in different ways, I reasoned. My poor boy had just watched his brother die. But a mother knows. Deep down in that place that has no words, a mother knows when something is fundamentally, terrifyingly wrong. Grief is a thick fog. It obscures everything, making it impossible to see the path ahead, or sometimes the truth that's standing right in front of you. It makes me wonder how many truths we miss because we are simply too heartbroken to see them. Have you ever looked back on a difficult time in your life and realized you missed a critical warning sign? Share your thoughts below, if you feel comfortable. Back then, I chose to believe the story I was told. It was an act of survival. Because admitting any other possibility, entertaining any other dark thought, would have meant I had lost both of my sons on the very same day. The years after we lost Stephen were a blur of quiet survival. You learn to live for the son you have left. Time doesn't heal that kind of wound. It just teaches you how to live around the gaping hole in the center of your life. And Adrian, in his own quiet way, seemed to step up. He finished college with a degree in finance, moved to Portland, just a couple of hours away, and met a girl named Nicole. When he brought her home to Cedar Creek to meet us for the first time, I felt a flicker of hope I thought had died with Stephen. Nicole was like a breath of fresh air. She was charming, attentive, and she looked at Adrian with an adoration that seemed so genuine. She called me Mom from the very first day, and was always the first to help me in the kitchen. She remembered our birthdays, our anniversary, and she made a point of calling us every Sunday evening, just to check in. They married a year later in a beautiful ceremony in a vineyard. When they had their first child, a boy named Leo, and then a daughter, Maya, it felt like our family was finally rebuilding. Holding my grandchildren, seeing them play in the same yard where their father and uncle had played, it was a balm on my scarred heart. For the first time in a long time, the silence in our house was filled with joy again. Adrian seemed to be thriving professionally. He told us he had left his corporate job to become a day trader, using complex algorithms and market analysis to make his own way. He spoke a language of portfolios, capital gains, and market trends that Lawrence and I didn't understand, but we were immensely proud. He drove a nice German car, wore expensive suits, and talked with a confidence that made us feel like our quiet, simple life was a relic from a bygone era. We believed he was successful. We wanted to believe it. Lawrence and I had lived frugally our entire lives. We never took extravagant vacations or bought fancy things. We paid off our house decades ago. Lawrence had a modest pension from the Carpenters Union, and we had our savings, carefully accumulated over 40 years. There was also the life insurance policy from Stephen, a heartbreaking sum of money from his first job that we never ever touched. We put it in a trust, and it had just sat there, growing, a silent, painful monument to the son we had lost. All told, with the value of our home, the land, and our savings, our estate was worth around $850,000. It wasn't a fortune by some standards, but it was a lifetime of hard work. It was our legacy, meant to provide for our grandchildren's college educations and futures long after we were gone. The first signs that something was wrong began about a year ago. Adrian's visits became more frequent, but the conversation started to subtly shift. He'd steer the talk towards our finances, always under the guise of loving concern. "Dad, with the way the market is, you should really think about diversifying your assets," he'd say. Or, "Mom, I was just thinking it's probably time we updated your will just to make sure everything is streamlined and protected." It was always couched in the language of love, of protection, but it felt rehearsed. The truth about his supposed success came out by pure accident. A letter, forwarded from their old address in Portland, arrived at our house one Tuesday morning. It wasn't from a bank. It was from a high-interest private lender, the kind of place you go to when you have nowhere else to turn. The letter spoke in harsh, unforgiving terms. Final notice. Outstanding debt of $63,000. Imminent legal action. Lawrence and I sat at our kitchen table, the same table he had built for our family, and read it over and over again. Adrian wasn't a successful trader. He was a gambler who had lost everything. He was drowning. When we gently confronted him, he spun a story about a temporary market downturn, a calculated risk that hadn't paid off. But from that day on, the pressure intensified. The suggestions about our will, about selling our house to downsize, about giving him power of attorney, became more urgent, more insistent. He was no longer a son offering loving advice. He was a predator circling what he believed was already his. Our $850,000 legacy was no longer a future for our grandchildren. It was a lifeline he was determined to grab, and we were the only ones standing in his way. We thought the constant, nagging pressure about the money was the worst of it. We were so naive. That was just the opening salvo. The real attack, the one designed to break us from the inside out, was far more insidious, far more cruel. They didn't come for our assets first. They came for my husband's mind. The fear of losing your memory, of your mind betraying you in old age, is a profound and terrifying thing. It's a deep-seated anxiety for people our age, and our son and his wife knew it. They decided to weaponize that fear against us with a chilling precision that still makes my blood run cold. It started subtly, like a slow, creeping poison. Nicole would visit during the week, always with a warm smile and a freshly baked apple pie. She'd help around the house, tidying things up. One afternoon, Lawrence went into his workshop, his sanctuary, and couldn't find his favorite set of hand-forged wood chisels. He was meticulous about his tools. He knew with absolute certainty he'd left them on his workbench. After a frantic 10 minutes of searching, Nicole found them in a drawer on the other side of the room. "Oh, Larry," she said, her voice dripping with a syrupy, theatrical concern. "You're getting a little forgetful, aren't you? They were right here the whole time." Lawrence just stared at the chisels, a confused and troubled look on his face. A few days later, Adrian called, his voice laced with manufactured tension. "Dad," he said, "you missed your 3 p.m. appointment with Dr. Miller. I told you about it on Sunday, remember? The one to check on your recent memory issues." Lawrence, of course, had no memory of such a conversation because it had never happened. When he insisted, Adrian sighed heavily into the phone, a sound of pure, calculated frustration. "See, Dad? This is exactly what we're worried about. It's okay. I'll reschedule." They were creating a reality and then punishing him for not living in it. They started planting these seeds of doubt all over Cedar Creek. They'd tell our neighbors, "We're a bit worried about Dad. His memory is starting to slip, so please don't be alarmed if he seems confused." They told my own sister over the phone that Lawrence had a minor episode and that the doctor suggested it was best not to have too many visitors, as it could agitate him. They were building a cage around us, brick by brick, using our friends' love and concern as the mortar. The most terrible part is that for a short, agonizing time, it worked on me. I started to watch my own husband of 42 years with a flicker of doubt. Every time he misplaced his reading glasses or took a moment to recall a name, a cold knot of fear would tighten in my stomach. Was I so desperate to believe my son wasn't a monster that I was willing to believe my husband was losing his mind? I felt like I was betraying him with every questioning glance. The fog of their manipulation finally began to clear one evening. Lawrence was in his workshop, and I heard a loud crash of wood. I ran out to find him standing over a ruined piece of maple, his hands trembling with a rage I hadn't seen in him for years. "She moved my saw guide," he said, his voice low and shaking. "She moved it. Just a fraction of an inch, but enough to ruin the cut. If I hadn't double-checked my measurements like I always do, I could have lost a hand. It wasn't forgetfulness. It wasn't an accident. It was sabotage. The goal wasn't just to make him seem confused. It was to make him dangerous to himself, to build a case that he was no longer competent. That's a special kind of evil, to try and convince someone they're crazy, to systematically dismantle their reality until they no longer trust their own mind. It's called gaslighting, and it is a terrifying weapon. I need to ask, have you ever witnessed someone using this tactic on a loved one, or experienced it yourself? Just knowing you're not alone can be a lifeline, so please, share your experience if you feel safe to do so. In that moment, looking at the fury and utter helplessness in my husband's eyes, I knew. This was no longer just about money. This was about our total annihilation, mind, body, and soul. That night, after we had swept up the splinters of ruined maple from the workshop floor, the dam of silence that had been carefully constructed in our home for 20 years finally broke. The calculated cruelty of the gaslighting, the sheer malice of trying to make Lawrence seem insane, had pushed my husband to a place I'd never seen him go before, a place where the truth, no matter how monstrous, was less painful than continuing to live with the lies. We sat at the old oak table in our kitchen, the same table where he'd helped both our boys with their homework, where we'd celebrated every birthday, where the ghost of Stephen still seemed to occupy an empty chair. The air grew thick and heavy, charged with the weight of 2 decades of unspoken words. He wouldn't look at me at first. He just stared down at his own hands, the same hands that had built this house and held my own for a lifetime, as if they belonged to someone else. When he finally looked up, his eyes were filled with a pain so profound, so ancient, it seemed to have aged him 10 years in 10 seconds. He looked like a man who had been carrying an impossible weight, and his strength was finally gone. "I made a choice, Flo," he whispered, his voice cracking and raw. "That day, on the river, I made a terrible choice. I chose our living son over our dead one." My heart stopped. I couldn't breathe. I knew, in that instant, that the life I thought I had lived was a complete and utter fabrication. He began to speak, and the story he told wasn't the one of a sudden storm and a tragic accident. It was a story of greed and betrayal that had started weeks before that fateful day on the river. Stephen had found out, Lawrence said, his voice barely audible. Adrian had been stealing from our savings account, not a little here and there, $20,000. He took it for some can't-miss cryptocurrency scheme that went bust. Stephen found the bank statements. He was a good, honest boy, and he couldn't stand the deceit. He was going to tell us everything. He told me how Stephen had confronted Adrian on the boat, out in the middle of the quiet, calm river. There was no storm, Florence. The water was like glass. Stephen gave him an ultimatum. Either Adrian confessed to them as soon as they got back to shore, or Stephen would tell them himself. Adrian, cornered and desperate, panicked. He begged, he pleaded, he lied. And when Stephen wouldn't back down, Adrian's desperation turned into rage. "He shoved him," Lawrence choked out, the words tearing from his throat like shrapnel. "He shoved him with all his might. Stephen wasn't expecting it. He lost his balance. His head hit the metal gunwale of the boat with a sound I can't get out of my head. And he fell into the water. He didn't even cry out, Flo. Adrian said he just disappeared beneath the surface. My world didn't just tilt, it ceased to exist. I was floating in a cold, black void. And the boat? I managed to whisper. Adrian did that himself, Lawrence admitted, tears now streaming down his face. He told me he waited, then he deliberately capsized the boat. He held his breath and went under, stayed in that freezing water until he was nearly hypothermic. He created the perfect, tragic story. Why? The only word my mind could form. Why, Larry? Why didn't you tell me? Why did you let me believe that lie for 20 years? His confession was the final blow. I got to the marina, and the police brought him to me. Our only son left. He was shivering and crying, and he swore to me it was an accident, that he just snapped and didn't mean for it to happen. Stephen was gone. I couldn't bring him back. And I thought if I told the truth, the police would take Adrian, and I would have lost everything. So I made a choice. I helped him keep his secret. I became his accomplice. And I have lived in that prison, right next to you, every single day since. The man I had loved for over 40 years was a stranger. The son I had mourned was a murder victim, and the son I had tried to love and nurture was a monster. The gaslighting, the manipulation, the relentless pressure about the money, it all snapped into a horrifying, crystal-clear focus. Adrian wasn't just trying to get our money. He was trying to neutralize the only other person on earth who knew the truth, to discredit him, to silence him before he finally broke. And now that I knew, I understood with chilling certainty. We were both loose ends that needed to be tied. Knowing the truth didn't set us free. It caged us. We were two prisoners, trapped inside the cozy walls of our own home, haunted by the ghost of one son and stalked by the greed of the other. The secret was a living entity in our house, a third person at the dinner table. Every unexpected phone call made our hearts leap into our throats. Every car that slowed down on our street sent a jolt of pure, undiluted terror through us. We were completely, utterly alone with this monstrous knowledge. And in the midst of this silent, suffocating fear, Nicole began her own special kind of psychological warfare. She must have sensed that the direct pressure and the gaslighting had failed, that we had solidified into a unified front against them. So, she changed tactics. She stopped talking to us about our health or our finances. Instead, she started talking about her children, our grandchildren. She began to use their innocence as a weapon. She brought Leo and Maya over the next Saturday. They came running through the door, a whirlwind of youthful energy. Little Maya, who was only 6 with big, curious eyes, ran straight into my arms. "Grandma, I love your garden," she said, her voice muffled against my sweater. I hugged her tight, breathing in that sweet, irreplaceable smell of a child's hair, and for a moment, it was a moment of pure, unadulterated love. But then, over Maya's small head, I saw Nicole watching us. She wasn't smiling a mother's warm smile. It was a thin, predatory smile of calculation. "She just loves it here so much," Nicole said, her voice as sweet as honey. "We were just talking in the car about how this beautiful house and all of your savings are going to be so important for her and Leo's future. It's so wonderful of you to have built all of this for them." The implication hung in the air, thick and poisonous. The house was no longer ours. It was a debt we owed our grandchildren, and she was the debt collector. A few days later, she called me, her voice full of a carefully rehearsed anxiety. "Oh, Florence, I was just looking at the tuition costs for Oregon State online. It's just astronomical. Adrian and I lie awake at night, worrying about how we'll ever give the kids the future they deserve, the kind of head start that Stephen would have wanted for them." The casual, cruel way she invoked Stephen's name was like a physical blow. She was using the memory of our murdered son to try and manipulate us into handing over our life savings to his killer. It was an act of such profound moral depravity that it left me speechless. The lowest point came in the mail. It was a card, written in our grandson Leo's clumsy 8-year-old handwriting. The front had a drawing of our house with smiling stick figures. It was a sweet thank you note for a birthday gift we had sent him. But at the bottom, there was a postscript, a sentence that was so obviously not his own words. "P.S.," it read. "Mommy says thank you for being the best grandparents and for saving all your money to help me go to space camp and college one day." I could picture the scene perfectly. Nicole standing over him, dictating every single manipulative word, twisting a child's simple gratitude into a tool of extortion. It was the most brilliant, evil strategy imaginable. They were leveraging my deepest love against me. Every hug from my grandchildren, every crayon drawing they taped to my fridge, every "I love you," Grandma now felt tainted, like a transaction in a negotiation I didn't even know I was a part of. They had turned the only source of pure joy left in my life into an instrument of emotional blackmail, and it left us paralyzed. We couldn't go to the police. Lawrence had confessed his complicity in the cover-up 20 years ago. We couldn't confront them directly. We knew what Adrian was capable of when he was cornered. So we just existed, smiling and playing with our grandchildren while their parents stood in the background, sharpening their knives, and waiting for the right moment to deliver the final cut. We were living on a knife's edge, waiting for that final, inevitable push. We didn't have to wait long. It became clear that their campaign of emotional blackmail wasn't working fast enough. Adrian was getting more desperate. His debts were likely mounting, and we knew from Stephen's tragic end what our surviving son was capable of when he felt cornered. The final invitation came on a Tuesday morning, wrapped in the guise of an olive branch, delivered with the voice of a loving son I no longer recognized. The phone rang, and it was Adrian. His tone was different. Gone was the tense, demanding edge from the past few months. In its place was a soft, gentle remorse that sounded so utterly fake it made the hairs on my arms stand up. "Mom," he began, his voice smooth as silk, "I know things have been tense lately, between all of us, and I hate it. You and Dad are the most important people in the world to me, and I feel like we're drifting apart. I've been doing a lot of thinking." I held the phone receiver so tightly my knuckles turned white, listening to this stunning performance. My heart was hammering against my ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. He went on, "Nicole and I were talking, and we really want to fix this. I was thinking, remember how you and Dad have always talked about taking a drive up to the Eagles Point overlook? To see the whole valley? We could go this Saturday, just the four of us. We'll pack a picnic, take some new family photos with the mountains in the background, a perfect day. No talk about money or wills or any of that heavy stuff, just a day together, like we used to be." The way he said it, so full of feigned love and wistful nostalgia, was the most terrifying thing I had ever heard. Every word was a carefully chosen lie, designed to soothe and disarm. He was offering us the illusion of the family we once were, the family he had personally destroyed. My own voice felt like it was coming from a great distance, thin and reedy. "That sounds lovely, Adrian," I managed to say, the word lovely tasting like ash and poison in my mouth. "Let me talk to your father, and I'll call you back." I hung up the phone, my hand trembling so badly I could barely place it back on the cradle. I turned and looked at Lawrence, who had been standing in the doorway to the kitchen, listening to every word. I didn't have to say anything. He had the same look of cold, stark terror on his face that I felt clawing at my own heart. "An overlook," Lawrence said, his voice a dead, hollow whisper. "A high place with a long fall. Just like with Stephen at the river gorge. It wasn't an invitation, it was a summons. He was naming the time and the place of our execution, and he was wrapping it in a pretty bow of family reconciliation to make sure we would walk willingly to the slaughter. My first instinct was pure, primal fear. "We can't go, Larry," I sobbed, the tears I had been holding back finally breaking free. "We can't just walk into his trap. We have to call the police. We have to run. We have to do something." But Lawrence, my practical, steady husband, who had lived with this guilt for 2 decades, looked at me with a grim resolve I had never seen before. His fear had been burned away, leaving something harder in its place. "And if we don't go, Flo?" he asked, his voice low and eerily calm. "What happens then? A gas leak in the house one night while we're sleeping? A botched robbery that leaves us dead in our beds?" He's not going to stop. He's in too deep, and now he knows that we know. We can't live the rest of our lives looking over our shoulders. At least this way, we know the battlefield. We're not just sitting ducks in our own home, waiting for him to choose the weapon and the time. The terrible, horrifying logic of his words settled over me like a shroud. He was right. We couldn't escape him. But we could perhaps face him on grounds he thought he had chosen, in a battle he thought he had already won. That evening, I called our son back and told him we would love to go. The 4 days between that fateful phone call and the Saturday of the trip were the longest and most surreal days of our lives. We lived in a state of quiet, hyper-aware terror, going through the motions of our normal life for the benefit of any watchful eyes. We tended the garden, we checked the mail, we waved to our neighbors. But underneath that placid surface, we were soldiers preparing for our final, desperate battle. We had agreed to walk into our son's trap, but we were not going to be lambs led to the slaughter. We decided that if this was to be our end, we would not go silently, we would not go empty-handed. It was Lawrence, my quiet, methodical husband, who came up with the plan. He had spent 20 years being silenced by his own guilt, and you could see a new, hard resolve in his eyes. He was not going to his grave without the truth being heard. He knew he couldn't overpower Adrian physically. Our son was younger, stronger, but Lawrence was a builder. He knew how to construct things, how to see a project through from blueprint to completion. And this time, he was constructing a case against our son, piece by painstaking piece. His weapon of choice wasn't a hammer or a saw from his workshop. It was a brand new, simple smartphone he bought for cash at a big box store in the next town over. He spent an entire afternoon in his workshop, not with wood, but with this small, sleek piece of glass and metal. I watched him through the window as he hunched over the instructions, his brow furrowed in concentration. He created a new anonymous cloud storage account, something he had to call my sister's tech-savvy son to walk him through. He found an app that could record audio and upload it live, in real time, to that cloud account. He tested it over and over again, walking to the end of our street and back, speaking softly into the phone's microphone, and then checking his old laptop to see if the audio file had appeared online. It had. "It's the only way, Flo," he explained to me that evening, his voice grim. "As long as this phone has a cellular signal, everything it records will be instantly and silently sent to a secure server hundreds of miles away. Even if he finds the phone and smashes it to pieces against a rock, the recording will be safe, the truth will be safe." While Lawrence prepared our digital witness, I prepared our human one. I sat down at our kitchen table with a pen and a stack of my best stationery. I wrote a letter to my sister, Harriet. I wrote until my hand ached, pouring out every ugly, terrible secret that we had kept locked away. I told her the real story of Stephen's death, about Lawrence's 20 years of silence, about the gaslighting, the financial pressure, and our chilling belief that Adrian was taking us to Eagles Point to kill us and make it look like an accident. It was my testimony, my final word, my confession, and my accusation all rolled into one, in case Lawrence's plan failed. I sealed the envelope and wrote, "Harriet, to be opened only if we don't come home from our trip on Saturday." I hid it in the safest place I could think of, inside our old family photo album, tucked behind a picture of a smiling, innocent Stephen at his 10th birthday party, a little boy with no idea of the monster his younger brother would become. Preparing for the worst is a strange and chilling thing. You hope with every fiber of your being that you're just being paranoid, but some cold, pragmatic part of you has to prepare for the fact that you might be right. It makes you think about what's truly important to leave behind, not money or property, but truth. If you had to write one letter to ensure the truth of your life was known, what's the one thing you would make sure to say? Let me know your thoughts down below. The night before the trip, Lawrence held me close in our bed and whispered, "No matter what happens tomorrow, Flo, we face it together." And for the first time in weeks, I felt a flicker not of hope, but of steel-hard resolve. We had a plan. We were ready. Saturday dawned offensively beautiful. The sky was a crisp, cloudless, impossible blue, a perfect day for an execution. Adrian and Nicole arrived right on time, pulling into our driveway with smiles that didn't reach their eyes. Adrian was even whistling a cheerful tune as he got out of his car. The monster was wearing his Sunday best. The 2-hour drive east from Cedar Creek into the Cascade Mountains was the quietest and yet the loudest drive of my life. Nicole had put on some cheerful pop station, and she sang along softly in the passenger seat, a perfect portrait of a happy daughter-in-law on a family outing. Lawrence and I sat in the back, the space between us charged with everything we couldn't say. We were hyper-aware of every little thing, the way Nicole's hand rested on Adrian's shoulder, the way he calmly navigated the winding mountain roads. I kept catching Adrian's eyes in the rearview mirror. There was nothing there. No love, no conflict, not even anger, just a flat, empty calmness. It was the eyes of someone driving to a business appointment, a task that simply needed to be completed. When we pulled into the gravel parking lot at the Eagles Point trailhead, Lawrence, ever the planner, feigned a stiff back from the long ride. He groaned dramatically as he climbed out of the car, arching his back and patting his jacket pocket where the new phone was hidden. It was a simple, natural movement that no one would look at twice, but I saw his thumb find and press the small button on the side. I let out a breath I didn't realize I had been holding. The digital witness was now active. The truth was being recorded. The hike to the overlook was about a mile, a well-maintained trail that wound through a majestic forest of towering Douglas firs. The air smelled clean and wild. Nicole chattered the entire way, a constant stream of meaningless observations. "Oh, look at that beautiful blue jay. Doesn't the air feel so fresh up here?" Her cheerfulness was a weapon, a bright, sharp instrument designed to make our grim silence seem sullen and ungrateful. Lawrence and I walked a few paces behind them, our breathing heavy, not just from the incline but from the crushing weight of what we knew was coming. Every step was a countdown. Every crunch of gravel under our feet felt like the tick of a clock. Eagle's Point was even more stunning and terrifying than it looked in the pictures. It was a wide, flat rock outcropping that offered a 180-degree view of the entire valley below. A river snaked through the landscape like a silver ribbon. The only thing separating us from a 150-foot sheer drop was a low, rustic stone wall, barely waist-high, more of a suggestion of safety than a real barrier. It was breathtakingly beautiful, and it was the perfect place to commit a murder and call it a tragic accident. "Oh, this is perfect for a photo," Nicole exclaimed with feigned delight, pulling out her smartphone. "You and Dad stand right over there, by the wall. I want to get the mountains in the background." She directed us like a photographer, moving us closer and closer to the edge with each polite suggestion. "A little more to the left. Perfect. The lighting is gorgeous. Now, just one more small step back. You're blocking the peak of the mountain." We were standing with our backs to the abyss. Our heels were inches from the edge. Lawrence and I exchanged one final, fleeting look. A look that said, "I love you. Goodbye. Remember the plan." This was it. Nicole raised her phone, but I could see she wasn't looking at the screen. She was looking at us. The sweet smile finally fell from her face, replaced by a look of cold, impatient satisfaction. Adrian stepped up, positioning himself directly behind us. He didn't say he was sorry. He didn't offer a final word of explanation. He just leaned in close enough for us to hear him whisper, his voice flat and devoid of all emotion. "The insurance paperwork is already filled out." And then, he pushed. I felt his hands, the hands I had once held when they were tiny and trusting, the hands I had taught to tie their own shoes slam into the middle of my back with brutal, efficient force. The world fell away. There was a moment of pure, horrifying weightlessness, a silent second where my body understood it was falling before my mind could catch up. The sky and the rocks and the trees spun into a nauseating vortex as my husband and I plunged together into the empty air, our final, unheard screams swallowed by the vast, indifferent wilderness. I don't know if I blacked out, maybe for a second, maybe for a minute. Time has no meaning when your body is in freefall. The impact wasn't a single, clean event. It was a symphony of destruction played on our bones, a brutal cacophony of snapping branches, tearing fabric, and the final, ground-shaking thud. We didn't hit a flat, hard surface. By some miracle, someone in a million chance, the base of the cliff wasn't solid rock. It was a steep, angled slope of soft earth and scree, thick with decades of fallen leaves and dense Oregon undergrowth. We crashed through a thick canopy of wild ferns and vine maples, the branches whipping and tearing at us, slowing our descent just enough to make the horrifying difference between instant death and a living hell. We tumbled down the slope, our bodies ragdolls in the grip of gravity, until we finally came to a tangled, broken rest among the roots of an ancient cedar tree. Pain was the first true sign of life, a white-hot, electric agony that screamed through every nerve ending, erasing all thought. My left arm was bent at an angle that I knew wasn't natural, and a sharp, stabbing fire in my chest made every ragged breath feel like I was swallowing glass. I could feel something warm and sticky matting the hair on the side of my head, dripping down my cheek. For a moment, I just lay there, pinned by my own shattered body, convinced that these were the final, fading sensations of a dying mind. I thought of Lawrence. I thought of Stephen, and I prepared to let go. But the sensations didn't fade. They sharpened. I could smell the rich, damp earth just inches from my face. I could feel the sharp edge of a small rock pressing into my cheek. I risked opening my eyes. Just a crack. Above me, the sky was a small, distant patch of blue, framed by the green leaves of the branches we had just fallen through. A bird chirped somewhere nearby, a sound so normal, so mundane, it felt like a hallucination. I was alive, miraculously, terribly, I was alive. And then I heard it. A sound so faint I almost missed it. A wet, ragged gasp for air from a few feet to my right. It was Lawrence. He was alive, too. Hope, a feeling so dangerous and foolish, surged through me. I wanted to call out his name, to crawl to him, to see how badly he was hurt. But before I could make a sound, his voice came again. It wasn't a call for help. It wasn't a cry of pain. It was a command, a desperate, agonized hiss forged from pure, unbreakable will. "Florence, don't move. Play dead. Now." The plan. Our only desperate, ridiculous, last-ditch plan. Every instinct, every cell in my body that was screaming in agony, protested. It wanted me to curl into a ball, to cry out for my husband, to scream for help until my lungs gave out. The pain was a living thing, and it demanded to be acknowledged. But Lawrence's words were an anchor in the swirling chaos of shock. With a force of will I didn't know I possessed, I fought back against my own body. I silenced the whimper that was rising in my throat. I forced my frantic breathing to become shallow, so faint it wouldn't stir a fallen leaf. I let my eyes fall half open, unfocused, staring blankly at a patch of moss just inches from my face. I let a trickle of blood from the corner of my mouth run down my chin without even thinking of wiping it away. I focused all my remaining energy, every last shred of my consciousness, on one single, agonizing task: stillness. Absolute, deathly stillness. We lay there, two broken figures in the dirt and leaves, pretending to be the corpses our son intended us to be. The forest was eerily silent around us, save for the buzz of an insect and the frantic, silent pounding of my own heart in my ears, a drumbeat I was sure he'd be able to hear from the top of the cliff, 150 feet above. Every second stretched into an eternity as we waited, listening for the sound of his footsteps, the crunch of leaves, the sign that he was coming down to inspect his handiwork. We lay in that terrifying, pain-filled silence for what felt like an hour. Every rustle of leaves was him coming back. Every snap of a distant twig was her, checking to make sure the job was done. My mind was a maelstrom of agony and fear. And then, finally, we heard them. Their voices. They weren't coming from directly above, as if they were peering over the edge. They were carried on the wind from the main trail, further down the slope. They weren't climbing down to check on us. They were already walking away, calmly starting the next phase of their meticulously crafted plan. Their voices were faint at first, then grew clearer as they must have rounded a bend in the path that brought them closer to the base of the cliff where we lay hidden. They were talking in calm, measured tones. Not the panicked whispers of people who just witnessed a horrific tragedy, but the practical, logistical tones of business partners finalizing a deal. "Are you absolutely sure they're dead?" It was Nicole's voice, sharp and laced with a thin wire of anxiety. "I mean, it's a long way down, but what if—" "Nikki, stop." Adrian's voice cut her off, flat and impatient, devoid of any emotion. "Nobody survives a 150-foot fall onto rocks and trees. It's done. They're gone. Now, we stick to the plan." "Did you get a little scraped up when you fell?" I heard a slight pause. "I twisted my ankle," she whined. "Perfect," he said coldly. "That helps. We wait another 20 minutes to make it look like we were disoriented. Then you make the call to 911. Your voice has to be hysterical. Got it?" I know, she snapped back. "We practice this. We say Dad lost his footing, reached for Mom, and pulled her over with him. We tried to save them. We got too close to the edge, and we fell too, but we were lucky enough to land on that lower ledge. We're the tragic, traumatized survivors." "Close," Adrian corrected, and his next words made my blood run cold. "Don't just say he lost his footing. Say he seemed confused all morning. Say we were worried about him, that he seemed unsteady. It plays directly into the dementia story we were building for the last 6 months. It makes the accident more plausible for the police. He was admitting it, right there in the open air. He was admitting to the gaslighting plot, the psychological torture he and his wife had put my husband through." And then Nicole said the words that would seal their fate. "God, this is just such a mess," she complained, and I could hear a scuffing sound, like she was kicking a rock in frustration. "I still can't believe that whole dementia act didn't work. It would have been so much cleaner. We could have had him declared incompetent months ago, and this all would have been over without all this." Adrian's reply was the nail in their coffin, a clear confession delivered to the invisible microphone in my husband's pocket. It would have worked if he hadn't gotten scared and confessed to Mom about Stephen. Once he did that, the clock was ticking. We knew it was only a matter of time before they went to the police. We had to accelerate the timeline. Lying there, broken and bleeding in the dirt, I almost felt a grim, triumphant smile touch my lips. He said it. He said Stephen's name. He had just connected his brother's murder to ours. My husband's phone, our silent, digital witness, had heard it all. Their conversation then turned to the sickeningly practical. "I think my ankle is actually twisted," Nicole complained again. "And these new hiking boots are completely ruined." Adrian, completely ignoring her, started listing his priorities as if he were planning a business meeting. "The first thing I'm doing when the probate clears is paying off the loan sharks. Then, we put a non-refundable down payment on that house by the lake. We should be able to get Mom and Dad's place on the market by spring. It's a seller's market right now." Listening to them, something inside me shifted. The shock, the grief, the unimaginable pain, it was all still there, a raging sea. But a new island rose from it, a cold, hard, diamond-sharp rage. The last vestiges of a mother's love for her son were incinerated in that moment, burned away by the sheer, casual evil of his words. It's horrifying to think about the conversations that happen when people think no one is listening. What do you think is more chilling, the act of violence itself, or the cold, calculated planning that comes after? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. All I knew was that our desperate plan had worked. We had their confession, recorded and saved. Now we just had to live long enough to use it. Their voices faded as they walked away, presumably to find a spot with better cell reception to make their fraudulent 911 call, and then came a new, more profound kind of waiting. It wasn't the anticipatory terror of waiting for them to come down. It was the primal fear of being left to die alone, broken at the bottom of a ravine as darkness fell. The sun began to dip lower behind the mountains, and the air in the shaded gorge grew cold, seeping into my bones. Just as a new, more desperate fear began to set in, the fear that they wouldn't call at all. That this was their plan all along, we heard it. A distant, rhythmic thumping that grew steadily louder, echoing off the canyon walls. A helicopter. They had made the call. The next stage of the performance was beginning. Soon, the air was filled with the deafening roar of the rotors. We saw ropes snake down through the trees, and then two figures in bright orange search and rescue jumpsuits rappelled down toward us. This was the first true test of our resolve. We couldn't just lie there. We had to be found, to be rescued, all while appearing to be on the brink of death. They were gentle and professional, their voices calm and reassuring in the midst of the chaos. "We're here to help you," one of them said as he knelt beside me, his hands expertly checking for a pulse in my neck. "Can you hear me, ma'am?" Every touch was a fresh explosion of pain. When they began to secure me to a rigid backboard for the airlift, I had to bite the inside of my cheek to keep from screaming. The agony was immense, but I had to remain a silent, broken doll. I kept my breathing shallow, my eyes unfocused, my body limp. I could hear them talking about Lawrence in clipped, professional tones. "Male has a possible tension pneumothorax. Vitals are unstable." I prayed he was strong enough to keep up the act. The helicopter ride was a noisy, vibrating blur. When the doors finally opened at the hospital, we were rushed into the controlled chaos of the emergency room. Bright lights, urgent voices, the beeping of a dozen machines. It was a whirlwind of activity, and then they wheeled Lawrence in one direction and me in another. For the first time since the fall, I was truly, terrifyingly alone, surrounded by strangers, my life in their hands, but completely unable to tell them the real danger I was in. A team of doctors and nurses descended on me, cutting away my clothes, inserting IVs, calling out medical jargon. Multiple fractures to the left radius, and ulna, possible internal bleeding, unresponsive to painful stimuli. They were working tirelessly to save my life, completely unaware that the real threat was not my injuries, but my son, who was most likely sitting in the waiting room at that very moment, practicing his grieving son performance for the hospital staff. Hours seemed to pass under the fluorescent lights. The initial flurry of activity subsided, leaving one nurse to quietly monitor my vitals. She was young, probably in her late 20s, with tired but incredibly intelligent eyes. Her name tag, clipped to her scrubs, read Chloe. The doctor had come and gone, shaking his head and telling some unseen person that it was touch and go, but Chloe, She was different. She wasn't just looking at the machines, she was looking at me. As she was checking the readings on the monitor next to my bed, I saw her frown slightly. I had been trying to keep my body still, but my mind was racing with fear and adrenaline, and my heart rate was likely far more erratic than that of a deeply unconscious person. She leaned in close to adjust the IV drip in my uninjured arm. Her face was just a foot from mine. This was it. This was my only chance. It was a massive risk, but I had to take it. With a surge of energy that cost me almost everything I had left, I did it. I moved the index finger of my right hand, just a tiny twitch. Once, then twice. It was a movement so small, so insignificant, it could have easily been dismissed as a muscle spasm. But Chloe saw it. Her hands, which had been deftly adjusting the drip rate, froze for a fraction of a second. Her eyes, which had been on the IV bag, flicked down to my hand, then shot up to my face. I was still staring blankly at the ceiling, but I tried to pour every ounce of my terror, my desperation, my plea for help into that vacant stare. She didn't gasp. She didn't call the doctor. She finished her task, her movements once again calm and deliberate. But as she turned to leave, she leaned in, pretending to fluff my pillow, and her lips barely moved as she whispered, a breath of sound so low that only I could possibly hear it. "Blink twice if you can hear me and you are in danger." My eyelids felt like they were weighted down with lead, but I summoned every last scrap of my will. I blinked. Once. Twice. A wave of relief so powerful it almost made me pass out washed over me. I wasn't alone in this anymore. I had an ally. Chloe walked out of my room with a professional calm that betrayed none of the earth-shattering secret she now carried. My life, my husband's life, the truth about my son Stephen, it was all in the hands of this young stranger, a woman who had every reason to dismiss my desperate signal as a neurological twitch from a dying patient. The next hour was the purest form of torture I have ever known. Nurses I didn't recognize came and went, checking my vitals, changing my IV. To them, I was just a body, a set of numbers on a screen. I had no idea if Chloe had believed me, if she was trying to get help, or if she had decided the risk of getting involved was too great. I was beginning to slip into a real state of despair, a terrifying thought that our plan had worked, but we would still die here before we could use it. And then, the door to my room opened again. It was Chloe, but she wasn't alone. With her were the senior ER doctor and two people in plain clothes who carried themselves with an authority that was unmistakable. They were police detectives, a man and a woman, both with serious, watchful eyes that missed nothing. A wave of relief so powerful it made me dizzy washed over me. Chloe had done it. She had risked her job, her credibility, everything, for a stranger. The lead detective, a tall man with graying temples who introduced himself as Detective Miller, approached my bed. The doctor and Chloe stood back, giving him space. He didn't loom over me. He knelt down slightly, so his eyes were level with mine. "Ma'am," he said, his voice low and calm, a stark contrast to the chaos of the last several hours. "Nurse Chloe has informed us of your communication and some serious concerns. We are here to help. You are safe now. If you can hear me and understand me, can you please open your eyes?" Slowly, fighting against the crushing weight of pain and exhaustion, I peeled my eyelids open. The collective, audible exhale of relief from Chloe and the doctor was the sweetest sound I had ever heard. My throat was raw, my lips cracked, and my voice came out as a dry, broken rasp, but I managed to force out the words that mattered. "My son, Adrian," he pushed us. I took a ragged breath. "My husband, Lawrence." His phone, his jacket pocket. It recorded. It recorded everything. Everything. Detective Miller's eyes widened, almost imperceptibly. He understood immediately. He dispatched his partner, a sharp-looking woman, to Lawrence's room down the hall. I learned later that Lawrence, bless his steady heart, had also managed to communicate with his nurse that he was conscious. When the detective arrived, Lawrence was lucid. He told her about the phone, and more importantly, he gave her the login details to the anonymous cloud account. Within minutes, the police department's tech unit had access to the entire, uncut audio file of Adrian and Nicole's conversation at the base of the cliff. they had their confession. While the technician secured the audio, Detective Miller stayed with me. A short while later, his partner returned to my doorway, her face pale with shock. She held up her phone and an earbud for him. "You need to hear this, Dave," she said. I watched Detective Miller's face as he listened. I saw his expression shift from professional skepticism to grim certainty, and finally, to a look of pure, unadulterated disgust. He took the earbud out and looked at me. "We have everything we need, Mrs. Scott. It's over." He and his partner walked out of my room with a grim sense of purpose. I couldn't see it, but Chloe, my guardian angel, later described the scene to me in perfect detail. They walked into the sterile, quiet waiting room where Adrian and Nicole were putting on a masterful performance of grief for a hospital chaplain. "Adrian and Nicole Scott?" Detective Miller's voice boomed, cutting through the hushed silence. They looked up, their faces a perfect mask of confused sorrow. "You are under arrest for the attempted murder of Florence and Lawrence Scott, and for the murder of Stephen Scott." Chloe said. The color drained from their faces in an instant. Nicole immediately burst into hysterical sobs. "It was his idea. He made me do it. I never wanted to." And Adrian, in a moment of pure, panicked stupidity that only a guilty man could muster, shouted the words that removed all possible doubt. "You have no proof. They were dead. Their phones are smashed to pieces at the bottom of a ravine." He had no idea that the truth wasn't in a broken piece of hardware. It was already safe in the cloud, miles away from his reach, an indelible, undeniable record of his evil. There is nothing more satisfying than the moment a carefully constructed web of lies is torn apart by the simple, undeniable truth. Justice doesn't always come, but when it does, it's a powerful thing to witness. Have you ever had a moment in your life where the truth finally came to light in a dramatic way? As I heard the commotion echoing down the hall, the panicked, accusatory shouts of my son and his wife, I closed my eyes. It was finally, truly, over. The chaos of the arrest eventually faded, replaced by the quiet, sterile routine of the hospital. That night wasn't the end of our story, but the beginning of a different, more difficult kind of journey. The slow, arduous path toward healing, and the fight to build a new definition of family from the ashes of the old one. The legal battle, as it turned out, was surprisingly swift. The audio recording from Lawrence's phone was the perfect, undeniable witness. It was a chilling 20-minute narrative of their crimes, in their own voices, confirming everything from the gaslighting plot to the murder of Stephen. Faced with it, their pathetic, self-serving alliance crumbled into dust. Nicole's defense was to claim Adrian had coerced and manipulated her for years, painting herself as another one of his victims. Adrian's lawyer attempted to argue for a crime of passion, a desperate act born of financial ruin, portraying him as a son pushed to the edge. The jury didn't buy it for a second. After a short, highly publicized trial, they were both found guilty on all counts: first-degree murder for what they did to Stephen, and 2 counts of attempted first-degree murder for what they did to us. The judge, a woman with eyes that seemed to see right through their lies, sentenced them both to 2 consecutive life sentences in prison without the possibility of parole. They would die behind bars, their greed having bought them nothing but a cold, concrete cell for the rest of their natural lives. Our physical recovery was slow and agonizing. There were multiple surgeries, a dizzying array of plates and screws to piece our bones back together, and months of grueling physical therapy that pushed us to our limits. Lawrence would likely walk with a limp for the rest of his life, and my left arm would never again have the strength to lift a heavy pot from the stove. But the physical pain, as intense as it was nothing compared to the emotional reckoning. For the first time in 20 years, Lawrence and I could talk openly about Stephen. We took out the old photo albums, and we didn't just look at the pictures, we talked about the boy in them. We grieved for the son we had lost, not to a tragic accident, but to his own brother's bottomless jealousy and greed. We wept for the monster we had unwittingly raised, and for the 20 years we had lost living under the suffocating shadow of a lie. It was a painful, cleansing fire, and it forged the bond between me and my husband into something stronger and more honest than it had ever been before. But our new purpose, the one thing that pulled us through the darkest days of recovery, was the children. Leo and Maya were immediately taken into the care of Child Protective Services. They were the last innocent victims in this sprawling tragedy, two bewildered children whose entire world had been violently ripped away. We hired a lawyer and began the long, complicated, and often frustrating process of petitioning for their legal custody. We had to go through background checks, home inspections, and hours of psychological evaluations, all to prove that we were fit to raise the children of the very people who had tried to murder us. 6 months after the fall, the judge granted our petition. The day we went to pick them up from their temporary foster home was the first day of the rest of our lives. We brought them home to the old Craftsman house in Cedar Creek, the house that held so many ghosts. That first night, as I tucked 8-year-old Leo into his bed, he looked up at me with his father's eyes and asked, "Grandma, when are Mommy and Daddy coming home?" And I had to find the words to explain the unexplainable. I sat on the edge of his bed, took his small hand in mine, and told him that his parents were in a place where they had to think about their bad choices for a very, very long time, but that he and Maya were home now, they were safe, and that Grandma and Grandpa would love them and protect them forever. We often think of family as something we are born into, an unbreakable bond of blood, but I've learned that sometimes true family is a choice. It's a promise you make to protect, to nurture, and to tell the truth, no matter how difficult. It's about who you show up for. What does the word family truly mean to you? I would be honored to read your thoughts. As I watched my grandchildren sleep that night, the quiet rhythm of their breathing filling the old house, I knew our former life was gone forever. But here, in its place, was a chance to break the cycle. A chance to build a new legacy for them, not on a foundation of lies and money, but on the simple, unshakable truth of unconditional love. It's been a year now since that day at Eagles Point. Life is different. It's quieter in some ways, and so much louder in others. Our old house is filled with the sounds of children again, the chaotic joy of Legos spilling on the floor, the arguments over cartoons, the sound of small feet running down the hallway. It's not the peaceful retirement Lawrence and I had planned, but it's a life nonetheless, a real one, built on a foundation of hard-won truth. There are good days and there are hard days. The nightmares still come for me sometimes, the phantom feeling of falling. And raising 2 children who have experienced a trauma so profound is a challenge that tests us every single day. But watching Leo discover a love for woodworking in his grandfather's shop, seeing Maya's genuine, carefree laughter as she helps me in the garden, these are the moments that stitch our new family together. We are healing, all 4 of us, slowly and together. If there's one lesson, one piece of wisdom I've been forced to learn from all this horror, it's this: you must trust your intuition. That small, quiet voice inside you that whispers when something feels wrong, when a story doesn't add up, when a smile doesn't reach the eyes. You have to listen to it. For 20 years, I silenced that voice because the truth it was hinting at was too monstrous to confront. I wanted the illusion of a perfect family so badly that I was willing to ignore the cracks in the foundation. Lawrence, out of a misguided love and a grief he couldn't bear, made a terrible compromise with the truth. And that single decision allowed a darkness to fester in our home until it grew powerful enough to consume everything. Don't make our mistake. Don't ignore the red flags for the sake of keeping a fragile peace. The small lies, the subtle manipulations, the unsettling feelings you can't quite name, they matter. They are the early warnings of a much larger storm. Have the difficult conversations. Seek help if you feel something is wrong. Because the truth, no matter how painful or ugly it is always safer in the long run than a beautiful, comforting lie. Thank you for letting me share my story with you all today. Your comments and shared experiences give me strength. Take care of yourselves and take care of each other. Goodbye for now,